Udlakut sivutlang mi kuyarigo mavunga NDP ngo katikkatabane katigigakit ukariaqtoq puila tamakkua pivalliayut isumaro tigillutigut piluaqtumit tamakkua liberokkut atuagangit angun sunanutkua tamakkua Inuit taimanganit saimatinut nappaqtittiyuutuinnarniqartau gasungniarnermut isumarukkama tamakkua ungatartuk sareriyikut atuagaksanginnut kiinaujarnit atoqpallianiartillugit tuqaangangiluarmata inungnut ukiortartormiunut tamakkua isumaarugi yattinni oqariartoqatta narunaeriartorluta tamakkua akerartortaujariaqarninginnit inuillu ukiortartormiullu sapputsautiammaqinniarutik kiinauyait amisungukkannereaqarmata ukiortartormut ammaru Inuit ilaujariaqarlutit tamanna ukiortartoq nammineqsortaullatаарniaruni Canadamit ilaujariaqarninginni. Good morning. I introduced myself in Inuktitut about what we're speaking with regards today. We're very concerned about the Liberals' policies on defense, and that's what we're raising in today's presser. Since the 1950s, Arctic sovereignty policies will not be repeated. Inuit were relocated to places like Grise Fiord, Resolute, and all other communities that I represent. Inuit were made to be human flagpoles in the name of Canada. Inuit were lied to in the name of Arctic sovereignty. Liberals repeatedly make major announcements in impacting the Arctic with a lack of consultation and cooperation with Arctic and Indigenous communities. Decisions about Canada's Arctic need to be made through cooperation, meaningful consultation, and consent. I am pleased with the announcement regarding the Junior Rangers program, as it will have a positive impact on young people in the Arctic communities, but it is not enough. Carney's defense plan, announced on Monday, relies heavily on the Arctic without investing in the people of the Arctic. Protecting Canada's Arctic means first and foremost investing in Inuit and Arctic territorial communities. Inuit expertise is being ignored, who have traditional knowledge of the Arctic since time immemorial. We've ended up in the past with rifles that don't work in the cold and projects that are never finished, like that of the Nunavut project in Nunavut. Too many times, Nunavummiut have barriers to engagement to Arctic security. Inuit Nunavummiut are living in unsafe, unhealthy housing conditions and have the highest poverty and food security in Canada. Since Nunavut was formed in 1999, it has experienced chronic underinvestments in community infrastructure and health care by successive Liberal and Conservative governments. New Democrats have always prioritized investments in people. Protecting Canada's Arctic sovereignty and security must include investments in northern communities and northerners. There needs to be investments in ensuring that students can go to school in better schools so that they can feel pride in going to school. They need better housing, more reliable power, improved health care throughout the Arctic, including addressing TB. We have more communities with epidemic of TB. We need investments in airport and marine infrastructure so that Nunavummiut can be engaged in Arctic sovereignty, which they so dearly want to. But if we're going to be treated as human flagpoles, we are at risk at remaining in poverty, and we need to ensure that that does not happen again. I will now give the floor to my colleague, Kuyanami.
Thank you. My name is Heather McPherson. I am the defense critic for the NDP, and I am deeply grateful to be here today with my colleagues, Don Davies and Lori Idlout. Lori's expertise in this field and voice for those in the North is sorely missing from the government's announcement, and it is so important that that perspective is brought to the table today. As New Democrats, I should say that we do welcome some of the things that came through the announcement. You know, we do welcome the spending and better support to the CAF personnel, particularly improvements to salaries, to healthcare, and to equipment. We also support Made in Canada defence production that benefits Canadian workers and Canadian industry. However, there are many things missing from this defence announcement. We need to see greater investments in people, in services, not just in the hardware. There has been decades-long abandonment of protecting the men and women in uniform that we have long called for more action by this government. We know that Canada's production and procurement must align with Canada's human rights obligations. Right now, Canada's arms export system is broken, and we must fix it to stop fueling the insecurity in human rights in Canada and around the world. Right now, we see the Canadian government not adhering to our arms trade treaty, selling weapons to places like Saudi Arabia, like India, like Israel, who are using them illegally against innocent civilians. We're also concerned that this particular process, this announcement, has missed key areas. We need to be looking at conflict prevention, at peacekeeping, at arms control, and at disarmament. These are areas that Canadians have expected this government to take a leadership role on, and we are so deeply diminished as a country in these areas. Those are the tools that we need to be investing in if we want actual, real global peace and real global security. And yet, at the same time, what we are seeing from this government is cuts to international development by 4.2%, cuts to peace security programming by 11.3%, and UN peacekeeping contributions are down 40% since 2016, 2017. At this moment in time where we see the Conservatives attacking foreign aid, where we see the lack of understanding of the importance of diplomacy, of development, and of peacekeeping as part of our foreign policy, what I see right now from this government looks very much like the policies of the Conservative Party of Canada. For example, we have heard that the ambassador for women, peace, and security is no longer in her position. That is shocking that this is the path that this government is taking as we try to build a more peaceful, secure world right now. We also know that international development is still lacking. For a long time, New Democrats have called for our defense spending to be echoed by our development spending. So if our defense spending is going up, our international development spending also must go up. And that's not happening at the moment. We are so far from reaching our 0.7 obligations that we have promised since Pearson. You know, Canada must balance our military commitments with global peacekeeping, diplomacy, and development. Security is not just about weapons. It is about people. It is about peace. And it is about human rights. Thank you very much. I'll pass it to Don. Go to the other side.
Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you to Heather McPherson and Lori Idlout for those important contributions to Canada's defence policy. In the last election, Mark Carney promised to protect Canada's sovereignty and assert our independence in response to unprecedented threats from the Trump administration. On March 27, 2025, he stated this unequivocally. This is what he said. The old relationship we had with the United States, based on deepening integration of our economies and tight security and military cooperation, is over. That was a bold and important stance. New Democrats agree with it. I think many Canadians voted for him because of it. Yet today, we are seeing alarming developments that contradict that commitment. Recently, we learned that the Liberal government is engaged in so-called high-level talks with the United States about joining its Golden Dome missile defense system, a costly plan that would draw Canada deeper into U.S. military infrastructure and compromise our sovereignty. Former Liberal Foreign Affairs Minister Lloyd Axworthy has called this more than just a baffling development, it's a betrayal of the vision Canadians voted for. President Trump himself recently made this alarming statement. I told Canada, which very much wants to be part of our fabulous Golden Dome system, that it will cost $61 billion if they remain a separate but unequal nation, but will cost $0 if they become our cherished 51st state. They are considering the offer. Canada's UN Ambassador Bob Rae called this threat a protection racket. Instead of indulging Mr. Trump's pressure tactics, New Democrats believe that we must assert an independent foreign and defense policy, one that reflects Canadian values and priorities, not those dictated by a volatile U.S. administration. That means explicitly rejecting Canadian participation in Mr. Trump's Golden Dome. Today, we are calling on Prime Minister Carney to do exactly that. It also means reevaluating our involvement in the F-35 program. Yesterday, the Auditor General of Canada found that the F-35 project is facing massive cost increases and delays. These include F-35 costs that have increased to $27.7 billion, double the original estimate. And these do not include other elements needed to achieve full operational capacity. Other essential infrastructure upgrades and advanced weapons will add at least another $5.5 billion to that bill. Construction of 2 new fighter squadron facilities to accommodate the F-35s is more than 3 years behind schedule. And the transition project is also facing other significant risks, including a potential shortage of qualified pilots. To New Democrats, it is unacceptable to pour tens, maybe hundreds, of billions of dollars into flawed military projects like the Golden Dome and the F-35 program that deepen our dependence on the United States at precisely the time that we need to pivot away. Canadians are counting on their federal government to defend our sovereignty in the face of President Trump's threats. They voted for a different path, one rooted in independence and a vision for Canadian security that puts our people and our principles first, and as the Liberals promised during the election. New Democrats believe that we can meet our NATO obligations by investing in Canadian suppliers, and diversifying our military purchases to other nations who are not threatening our independence and sovereignty. We also believe, as has been said, that our military expenditures should serve a social utility wherever possible, such as improved wages and housing for our Canadian Armed Forces personnel, modern equipment for disaster relief, increased peacekeeping capacity, and robust Coast Guard ships and capabilities, and of course, addressing the long-standing inequities in our Arctic and our North. By doing so, we can meet our NATO commitments, enhance Canadian sovereignty, and properly equip our military to provide essential, productive, and effective services to keep Canadians safe. Finally, we have serious concerns about how the Liberals intend to pay for increased defence spending. The Parliamentary Budget Officer notes that tying spending to our GDP increases will result in extra annual expenditures totaling tens of billions of dollars a year. In fact, he estimates that that'll be $81 billion by 2032 in annual expenditures for defence. Now, the Liberals in their throne speech have said that they want to cut taxes and keep spending to below 2%. The Parliamentary Budget Officer has weighed in on this as well, saying that the only way that that can happen is if there are severe cuts to public services. So while the New Democratic Party supports defence investments, it cannot come at the expense of the critical services and help that Canadians need and deserve. Thank you, and we look forward to taking any questions that you may have.
Given your concerns about the defense spending plan, will you be supporting supplementary estimates where the money's outlined?
Well, the supplementary estimates also contain the spending that was announced in the previous Parliament, things like dental care, things like pharmacare, increased investments in housing. So, so far our analysis of the estimates is that it includes the kind of investments that the last Parliament and the last government had announced. So I think that we're going to be looking carefully at that. What I'm more concerned about is the throne speech, which charts a path forward after these estimates are passed, and that's where I think our concern really lies.
You're also calling for more investments in northern communities. We have Bill C5 with major infrastructure projects of national interest. Are you going to be supporting that as well? And if that means more investments in northern communities?
Do you want Lori to take that?
Do you want to take that?
Sure. Thank you for the question. We do have grave concerns regarding Bill C5. Bill C5 looks to undermine Indigenous people's rights, and given that the consultation process would be expedited, especially during times when there's major forest fires where thousands of Indigenous peoples are being flown from their home territories into places like Winnipeg. How can there truly be free, prior, and informed consent when they're not at home to ensure that they can look at what these proposed projects might be and whether they would consent to it? So this bill is a major concern just for those factors alone, and we haven't decided as a party yet as to whether we'll support Bill C5 or not, but we are highlighting that we are greatly concerned about it.
So on C5 then, just to follow up on that point specifically, the Prime Minister, I believe, said last week about the one review process, whether it happens at the federal level or the provincial or territorial level. And so for a project in your riding, I'm thinking about the Grays Bay Road and Port project, for instance, that the Nunavut government has been pushing, or even the port in Kakadu. As far as the bill is crafted itself, is there still a role for the Nunavut Impact Review Board to review those projects then, as far as you're aware?
I am quite concerned with, with First Nations, that one project, one review is a major concern. It would have the potential to violate Indigenous people's rights, including the directions that might be given to the Nunavut Impact Review Board. I've seen that Grace Bay as a project has been highlighted quite a bit, but that to me is another concern. How is it that a Grace Bay Road that would connect a community to a mine is a national building project? We need to be seeing, for example, in order for Bill C5 or any nation interest projects to be successful, Indigenous peoples must be lifted up too. There are too many Indigenous peoples that live in poverty, too many Indigenous peoples that have access to healthcare that Canadians don't. We need to make sure, for example, that the Inuit Child First initiative is reinstated fully, as well as making sure that the Jordan's Principle program, the legal obligations under Jordan's Principle are being implemented. And with C5, the balance between C5 and the poverty that Indigenous people will be left in mean that we need to take very careful consideration about whether these projects will truly be nation-building projects or not.
On to follow up on a point Mr. Davies had talked about before, and you're welcome to answer if you'd like, Ms. Idlout as well, but you guys have said that as far as defense spending goes, to tie it into social construction as much as possible. The federal government, I think, has been pretty clear in saying that in regards to, just an example, the Iqaluit Northern Operational Support Hub, there'd be dual-use infrastructure. They've used that term kind of time and time again as far as infrastructure that would help support the hubs as well as bolster the community. Just wondering kind of what else do you guys envision as far as how defense spending can be tied into social infrastructure?
Social infrastructure projects that could benefit Nunavut greatly could include other projects that haven't been discussed, like what I've heard from people in Nunavut. Sanirayak, for example, would love to be considered as a regional hub. It's received support from communities like Kingite, to see Sandayak as a base for search and rescue teams, because right now, as it is, the base is in Halifax, and with the impacts of climate change, there keep being many more people, many hunters that are either being lost and require the services of search and rescue teams, and without the proper investments in ensuring that search and rescue teams can properly function within Nunavut, we need to see more investments in airports, in bases being created in Sandayak, airports being paved in places like Cambridge Bay as a regional hub. These kinds of investments, these kinds of enhancements could include making sure that reliable air transportation can happen so that it can be affordable, so that Nunavut can be engaged in Arctic sovereignty and Arctic security.
I guess what I'm wondering though is that as we've heard the government talk about dual-use infrastructure, is there a concern on your part that the defense spending they tie into bolstering the Arctic will not serve that dual-use purpose they talked about?
Absolutely. It is a major concern, the lack of information that was shared during their briefing earlier this week, and the lack of reluctance for them to share more information on how they would invest in the North and how they would work with Indigenous communities is definitely a major concern.
Do you think they figured out those plans at this point?
If they're rushing it, I don't know that they will, and this is what's the problem with the Liberal government. If they're going to be rushing everything, they're going to be violating Indigenous people's rights, and that's what our major concerns are.
Mr. Davies, you said you wanted a rethink of the F-35 program, but the AG's audit said the delays on making decisions about the F-35 has contributed to the extra costs. So wouldn't rethinking this program just create more costs for our Canadians?
You know, the F-35 has been an issue in this Parliament for almost as long as I've been here. And what I think is more important is that we get it right. One of the, I think, recent considerations that is now affecting the whole F-35 consideration has been the Trump policy. And, you know, I know that there's issues. I think it's in that some of the technology may be controlled in Texas. And so now we have a question as to whether or not Canadian military aircraft, whether it's wise from a sovereignty point of view to lose control of the technology and have that controlled by an administration that is openly threatening our sovereignty and independence. So to me, it's more important that we get it right. This is a major expenditure. It's a critical piece of Canada's armed forces material moving forward. And so I think we need a rethink. I don't think getting it right and becoming effective and doing it in a timely way are incompatible. I think it's an indictment of previous Liberal and Conservative governments that it's taken decades to actually come to a decision on getting our Air Force personnel the equipment they need. You know, they're still flying helicopters that are dangerous. You know, they're still, you know, our fighter aircraft are out of date, and so, you know, I think New Democrats are calling for an effective, efficient, and smart decision about the kind of equipment our personnel needs. But it's got to make sense with the new reality of the Trump administration.
And Ms. McPherson, you called out arms exports to Saudi Arabia, India, yet those leaders are coming to Canada for the G7 summit. So do you have concerns with that? Like, do you think...
Yes, I have deep concerns with that. I think all Canadians, we've heard from across Canada, we're all Canadians that are concerned about foreign interference, all Canadians who are concerned with the protection of human rights, are deeply alarmed when we see people like the Indian Prime Minister Modi being invited to Canada after he has been accused of orchestrating the death of a Canadian citizen on Canadian soil. You know, obviously what he has done against dissidents and human rights activists within his own country is appalling. We now know that the Saudi leader has also been invited, and obviously the attacks on journalists and on human rights defenders, from his perspective, that's appalling. For me, what it indicates is that this government has consistently and very clearly chosen profits and the economy over human rights, over people. We've seen that within Canada. We've seen the way that Bill C-5 seeks to override the rights of Indigenous people across this country, and we see this with this invitation. It's deeply alarming for a government who has no coherent foreign policy that is not using any sort of a feminist lens to determine that foreign policy, and who has clearly made profit over people their mantra at this moment. I don't think that's what Canadians voted for.
Are profit and people interchangeable, though? I mean, on one hand, the economy does have quite a bearing on people's cost of living. That was one of the major concerns of the election.
I think all Canadians expect their government to be able to have, provide good family-sustaining jobs, but not at the expense of human rights, not at the expense of taking away the rights of people. Canadians rightly have pride in this country for being the country that was not always the biggest, not always the most powerful, but often played that convening role or played that moral role of being there. We talked about Lloyd Axworthy. I think of him often, and how we were the basis for the international criminal justice system. We were the basis for so many of the disarmament treaties that have happened in this world, and yet at this moment in time, Canada's absent. We are basically our foreign policy is a shadow of the United States at a time when we should be moving away from the United States.
Thank you. This concludes the press conference. Merci, c'est ce qui conclut cette conférence de presse.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.